Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Nice to see some familiar faces and many that aren't, so it's good to meet you. Um, my name is Shelley Myers, and I work for the Office of State Tax Commissioner. I was asked to give information on locally and centrally assessed properties, including timelines, because I was told timelines are helpful. So we will go through that. If I can, green button. So we're going to start with centrally assessed. Centrally assessed properties are, we have two ways of assessing them. One is called ad valorem, which is assessed according to their value. And then the other is a payment in lieu of tax. And I'll go through how those are assessed here as we go. I tried to find a picture with as many utility type assessment pieces as I could. So in this one, we've got rail, we've got wind, we've got transmission lines. So I was kind of proud. Okay, centrally assessed properties that are assessed according to their value are pipelines, railroad, wind farms, electric and gas companies, air transportation companies. Again, ad valorem means that we tax the companies according to their value by using like a cost and an income approach to value. For pipeline companies, and they're all done just a little differently, but for pipeline companies, we look at the operative property, both real and personal, and it's valued by taking into consideration the earning power of the property. To see that, we look at stocks and bonds, we look at their franchises, rights and privileges, their income, their earnings, and then we assess the property as a whole. A lot of our pipelines or railroads, they're big. They're outside of state lines. So we assess the company as a whole, and then we kind of narrow it down to just what's in North Dakota, and then that's how we tax them. And that's the same with all of the properties that we're going to be talking about today in the centrally assessed. Let's see here. For railroads, we value all real property in the operation of the railroad, but we remove from the system value all personal property. So personal property would be their locomotives, rail cars, vehicles, workforce, computer software. We don't look at any of that for the railroad. But again, a share of the system value is allocated to North Dakota according to the gross revenues, the revenue traffic units, and the car and locomotive miles. When assessing wind farms, that's very similar to pipelines. We look at all of the operative property, real and personal. A system value is calculated and allocated to North Dakota based on the location of the property. Wind farms are special because they are both ad valorem property and payment in lieu of property tax. So there's two different places in statute that we go to determine how to value. The property in lieu of tax for wind farms is any wind farm that was built after December 31st, 2014, or turned 20 years old. Then it flips from ad valorem into pilots. So the pilot is just more of a flat tax, and we'll talk about that later. But so right now we have a few in each. Next is electric and gas companies. When assessing electric and gas companies, all operative property of the investor-owned utilities, real and personal, is subject to assessment. Like other centrally assessed companies, the system value is calculated and allocated just to North Dakota. And finally, we have air transportation. The air transportation is valued a little bit differently. The total of the net lease payments for real property divided by a cap rate gives us the market value, and that's what we use. The cities with airlines and air transportation companies provide a total taxable value broken down by school districts. Some of you know this way better than I do, even. Multiplied by 1 mill rate to determine an average mill rate. And then each airline's taxable value is multiplied by that average yearly mill rate to calculate the tax due. So airline is a little different than the first few centrally assessed types of property that we talked about, because we at our office actually bill and collect payments for the airlines, much like electric tax. And as I said that, I thought, I think we collect the payments, but we do bill them. So yeah, we would collect the payments. But that concludes the centrally assessed ad valorem. Now we're going to talk about the centrally assessed payments in lieu. The numbers I have behind these, and I should have said this at the first centrally assessed one, that's how many companies we have in each category. So now we'll get to distribution, transmission, generation, and generation from wind. These we call electric tax. So the distribution tax is calculated, and these are the flat tax, so the formula's in century code. It's calculated at a rate of 80 cents per megawatt hour for retail sale of electricity delivered to a consumer in the state during the calendar year. The transmission line tax is subject to annual taxes per mile or fraction of a mile based on the nominal operating voltages in the year placed in service. The electric wind generation tax encompasses wind generators, wind farms, and associated collector systems, and they're subject to a tax of $2.50 per kilowatt hour times the rated capacity of the wind generator, and a tax of 1/2 of 1 mil times each kilowatt hour of electricity generated by the wind generator. Electric generation tax uses the generation capacity of 100 kilowatts or more and is based on 50 cents per kilowatt times the rated capacity of generation unit and 1 mil per kilowatt hour of electricity generated by the power unit for the grid-connected generators that are not part of the project. So in a 6-week time frame, we, in Property Tax Division, assess approximately $14 billion of true and full value to the centrally assessed properties. That is on your left, my right. The one on the right, wait, did I even say that right? Yeah, your left, my right. The one on the right is the payments in lieu of tax, and that's about $32 million that we collect every year. The ad valorem companies report by May 31st, or excuse me, by May 1st, and then the electric companies report by June 1st. So the tentative assessments went out on Friday to all of the companies. They have to be sent out by January 15th, which gives 2 weeks for the companies to challenge and appeal their values. So right now my team is making a lot of appointments because everybody wants to challenge their value. Finally, on, let's see, what's the date? State Board is on July 8th. So on July 8th, we will take all of the assessments that we have put together, give them to the State Board of Equalization, and then they ask us questions and then either make changes or approve the values that we give to them. So our goal then is to get all of the counties that information as soon as possible. I think last year, well, our goal is to do it within a week of that meeting. I think last year we would kind of beat our record, so we're going to see if we can beat our record this year and get them out. Well, I'll keep it a secret. But here is the timeline, just as a overall. All centrally assessed companies are assessed as of January 1. The companies submit their reports to the Property Tax Division by May 1st, June 1st if they're electric tax. The property tax staff has until June 15th to complete all of the assessments and get them sent out to the companies. And then they have until approximately July 1st to meet and talk about the appeals or the challenges from the companies and figure out how to move forward. And then the State Board of Equalization reviews the recommendations and finalizes those assessments on the second Tuesday of every July. So again, the meeting this year is July 8th, and hopefully we can, again, beat our record and get you the information as soon as possible and faster than last year. So now we're going to talk about locally assessed properties, and I don't know how to make this fun. It's just what it is, right? So let's see. Okay, so assessing is fair and equitable administration of the property tax system. That's the goal. The degree of efficiency and accuracy in determining the market value of the taxable property directly affects the proportion of local government costs based on every property, The degree of efficiency and accuracy in determining the market value of the taxable property directly affects the proportion of local government costs placed on every property owner. Wow, that was hard. To effectively administer property tax, the assessors use 3 approaches to value. The sales comparison approach evaluates the sales market, estimating the value of a property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently sold. The cost approach determines an estimate based on the total of the land value and the depreciated cost of the building and other improvements. And then the income approach calculates the present value by converting all expected future net benefits into a current value. So residential property is a building classified as a residential property is one that is used as a dwelling by an individual or group of individuals that provides a separate family living quarter for less than 4 family units. Garages, barns, and storage buildings located on a parcel with a residence and used in connection with the residential use are classified as residential. House Bill 1176 this session split the residential class of property into 2 categories, primary and non-primary. As far as how this collective class of property is going to be valued, it stays exactly the same. There are no changes to how the residential class will be valued. Buildings not located on the same parcel as a residence and not used in connection with a residence should be classified as commercial property. An apartment building or other buildings with 4 or more family units, retail buildings, shop condos, hotels, vacant lots, and any building that is not exempt as a farm building are classified as commercial property. When assessing commercial property, the assessor uses all 3 approaches to value: the sales comparison, the cost using depreciation, and the income approach when they're all 3 available. Agricultural property means platted or unplatted lands used for raising agricultural crops or grazing farm animals. Ag property includes land on which a greenhouse or other building is located if the land is used for a nursery or other purpose associated with the operation of the greenhouse. In brief, ag land assessments are based on actual use of the land as in crop or non-crop, soil type, soil classification data from soil surveys, and modifiers that have been approved. And the locally assessed timeline is as follows. All property in North Dakota is assessed as of February 1st. All assessments are finalized in March, and in April, township boards can meet anytime. City boards of equalization meet within the first 15 days of April, and county boards of equalization meet within the first 10 days of June. State board meets on the second Tuesday of each August, and that means that this year it's August 12th. At the August meeting, the state board hears any appeals that have come from the local level, and the appeals are given to the property tax division to investigate. On October 2nd this year, the board will meet again and hear all the recommendations for any appeals that have come forward. And as a rule, it's usually the second Thursday, the first Thursday of every year that the board meets for that second meeting. That was a lot of information that we went through, but I think that, I'm hoping that the timeline helps you in knowing when you're going to get information and what you can expect from us. But thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Erica.
So a question, as the state, this is about centrally assessed properties.
Okay.
So because you are the assessor of centrally assessed properties, and in the world of caps, new growth calculations are extremely important in the cap calculation. Is the state tax commissioner's office also going to be calculating the new growth for the centrally assessed properties?
That is such a good question. I think we're going to have to. Jury's out. No, I think we're going to have to, yeah. But it will, yeah. Good question. Good, Linda.
I just thought I would add, one of the things you suggested of a methodology for counties to determine the new growth in their centrally assessed is on the date of...
Yes, okay, thank you very much. I hear what, okay, my brain is catching up to this question line. So when we send out information from our office to you as a county, we send out big allocation sheets. It has every line that the transmission line goes in. It has information in that line, and to see if it's new growth, there is a year in service column. If you filter that year in service, anything 2024 is listed, anything new would be listed. So when you hit that little filter button, you can see what years, how long the pipe's been in line, or if they've added new pipe or new transmission lines or whatever. But that is consistent throughout all of the different types of property. So, Erica, I'm sorry, can I circle back? Because we don't do the budgets for the counties, it will be up to the counties. Now that my brain is on the track of that question and answer, the counties will have to look for that new growth. So, thank you.
When you say counties will have to look for that new growth, what does that mean? And if there was, second question is, if there was, do you anticipate an increase of growth for the centrally assessed values?
Good questions. The centrally assessed does not grow very quickly. We do have new, well, except for in McKenzie County. Sorry. No. Yeah. The western part of the state, that's a lie, I guess. But we do have like a new, MDU has a new line of natural gas going to underserved communities. That is also something that we track in those allocation sheets. It is exempt, however, but you know, I guess every year there is construction work in progress going into place here and there, but we don't see huge jumps at this point. In the last few years, it's kind of stabilized. Did I answer both questions?
When you mention counties make that determination, what do you mean by that? They determine what exactly?
Okay, thank you. So in order to determine new growth on the county level, when we send those allocation sheets, you'll go through the years of service, just look through years in service on that allocation sheet. There's that column, and I can see it in my head, I just don't know what letter it is right now. But there's a column on the last page, or on the, nope, it's on the allocation sheet that you get for each. You get a list of just every single company in your jurisdiction. So every single company has a year in service where their pipeline was put into place. So that's where you'll look. If you need more guidance when it comes to that, call my office. All of us can help you with that.
Can you hear me? I thought I would just kind of tie together what I think the message I was hoping that we got from your presentation, and thank you very much. Two things, two takeaways is those timelines, the centrally assessed timeline. If you got that from Shelley's presentation, those values are not ready for you until mid-July, mid to the end of July. I've been getting a lot of those questions. So the centrally assessed value, you won't get till the mid to end of July. Your locally assessed value, you'll have a pretty good idea through your tax director by the end of June. Up until then, everything's an estimate. So just so you know, and you need both of those. Regarding centrally assessed, whoever in your county is taking those certified amounts from the tax department and spreading them into your tax system, this all makes sense to them because they can envision those big, large Excel spreadsheets. There is a column that says date and service. If it says 2025 this year, you can consider that new growth. And the new growth for a lot of jurisdictions is going to be a very important number going forward because it allows you're going to be able to take cap dollars, additional 3% dollars on that new growth. So we can do great estimates, but really you really won't know until the end of July. You won't have a final value, but as far as estimating for caps, they can't wait till October. End of July is when you'll have a decent value to calculate your cap on. And I just wanted to make sure you understood that. And those folks that do that, spread those centrally assessed properties into your tax systems, you know who to call if you have questions on it. And that's the tax department. And it is the tax director that in your county that has those values, not the county auditor. The county auditor will get it from the tax director as well. But I know I've got a lot of questions on that as well. So hopefully that, and thank you so much, Shelley.
Thank you.
All right, let's give Shelley a round of applause. And for the individual online, S. Meyer, your question, we'll ask that question later. I don't think Shelley would be able to handle that. So during the legislative session, if your cell phone rings during a hearing, it's $20. So we're going to have that rule today, but we're going to institute a new one. If you try to talk without a microphone, that's $20. So we'll institute that rule now. But yes, thank you, Shelley. So our next speaker, we're going to roll right through these. We have Katie Paulson, McKenzie County Tax Director and Recorder. She's going to talk about calculating new growth value, when, who, new growth, and final values for budgets. Let's give Katie a round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm Katie Paulson. I've been the Tax Director in McKenzie County since 2014. I was kind of the last person that said, fine, I'll do this presentation. I was really hoping somebody else that has a lot more experience could have been up here, but here I am. First of all, Shelley touched on it, but our job as assessors is to fairly assess, apply a value to every parcel in our county that is locally assessed, residential, commercial, agricultural. Tricky job. We have a lot of things that go into it. And a big part of the process is the equalization process. So, like Shelley said, our assessment date is February 1st. What does that mean? It means that we are looking at properties as they are as of February 1st of the tax year. So if you're partially under construction, we take that into consideration. If you're using it as ag, and then partway through the year you change it to commercial, we always are looking at that date. So that assessment date is important. It's important for when new construction goes on the tax rolls. It's important when properties change classification from one type of property to another. So that applies to like annexations, which I'll talk about in the new growth. So the assessment date, February 1st, and then we go through the cycle of putting the value on the system, noticing our property owners. Next year it's changing. Every parcel will get a notice of value from the county that talks about when the local equalization meetings are. Like Shelley said, the local townships and cities have their equalization process, their local hearings in April. So generally, we have values inputted for anybody that's having a hearing in April by the middle of March so that we can send notices. Prior, it was notices if your value changed by 10% and $3,000. But again, that's changing. Everybody's going to get a notice, so we're going to have to make sure that we have those values in the system at least 15 days prior to the equalization meetings. The towns and the townships hold their meetings at different times during April, and then we wait and we do the county equalization within the first 10 days of June. This day is important because this is when we have our first real estimate of what our valuation is and what our new growth is, because we would have entered all of those in time to notice our property owners. So June would be the first potential time you could start to get some local assessment numbers from us. Again, you know from Shelley that the central assessments don't come in July. The tricky part is sometimes there are things that can affect our estimates of values as approved by the County Board of Equalization. A couple of those things are, one of the rules that we have as tax directors is that we need to be within 90 to 100% of market value or the value assigned by NDSU for agricultural land value. That's what we call tolerance. So our first job is to make sure that our market value or our agricultural value has that 90 or above to what our market value is. We figure out that market value by the sales ratio, which tax directors, city assessors do annually. We do it every year. We're working on that in the winter so that we can set the values in March and move forward. So when I talk about tolerance, that's part of our job. When we're looking at our tolerance, we're looking at the valuations of existing properties and how they measure up to our sales ratio and our median ratio, which we look at in each class of property. We have to equalize agricultural land separately, we have to equalize residential land separately, and we have to equalize commercial land separately. So there's a lot of moving parts. So that's the first piece of it. Hopefully, when we are presenting our numbers to our boards, we are in tolerance. Sometimes we are not. So sometimes if you are not at that 90-degree threshold and you haven't made a decision to put yourself at that 90-degree threshold, you're waiting for advice and ruling from the State Board of Equalization to get to the number that we need to be. So that's the first piece. If you're at 90%, probably good. You're probably not going to see any changes. The other part that can affect your estimate of value for budgeting purposes is if you have appeals. The equalization process is the informal process that property taxpayers can go to their boards that rule them and say that they have an unfair assessment for whatever reason. Provide documentation, say their points, listen to the assessor or the tax director, whoever is setting the values, defend their value, or say, yeah, I might have been a little greedy on that. I kind of agree. You know, we do that too. But that's the process where we can do some adjustments to values before taxes are levied. The appeal process isn't finalized, truthfully, until that October meeting that the state board finalizes the recommendations from the state tax department. So county tax directors would know if they have any appeals. For example, McKinsey County out in the county didn't have any appeals, but the city of Watford City had one apartment building appeal. So we know that there's one parcel that the value could change. Depending upon the magnitude of value of that parcel could affect the number that you guys need for assessments. Most of the time, if it's 1 or 2 parcels, not going to make a big difference. If it's one of my gas plants that's 248 million, it might make a big difference when you're talking about taxable valuation. I was talking about total, true, and full. But those are the things. So just be aware that when you're asking for this information from the tax directors, that there might be some factors that affect it. As tax directors, we're going to do our best to communicate with you if we know there might be some things that affect these numbers. If we have a tolerance issue that we didn't address and fix at county board, if we have a major appeal that might affect a certain school district, city, fire district, whatever, we're going to know that information and hopefully be able to communicate to the people that are requesting that information. It's really important that we keep those lines of communication open, and it's really important that you understand that until October, when the values are finalized, it's an estimate, as close as we can. So the next piece of it, the complicated piece, new growth. Because new growth has its own separate consideration in HB 1176, I was just going to talk a little bit about where these new growth numbers come from and how we track them as tax directors. So there are different classifications of how we track the changes in property assessment in the tax system. So the first code that we call this our supplemental abstract. We report our supplemental abstract to the state. Assessors use information on this supplemental abstract a little bit differently than what auditors use. So I'll talk about it and then I'll kind of talk about the differences after this. First of all, when we're entering property value, we look at if the property has changed from taxable to non-taxable or vice versa. What does that mean? The city purchases a parcel of land because they need to build a new public works building. They purchased it from a private property owner. Prior to the city purchasing it, it was commercially taxed as a vacant lot. After the city has purchased it, it becomes exempt. We lose that value in the system. So that's a decrease. Or if, say, the city says, oh, we're going to sell the old city shop, that thing's obsolete, it would be money ahead if we sold it and built a new one. So they sell their exempt property to a private person that is taxable. That goes from being exempt to taxable. That's one example. We track that. Local assessment to central assessment, vice versa. Increase would be changing it to a central assessment, and it would be a decrease from the local assessment. And if it was a central assessment, and for whatever reason, I've never used this code, so I don't know, but for whatever reason, it went back to being locally assessed, again, we would track that. New construction or demolition. An increase is new construction. New houses, new buildings, any new structure would be new construction. That would be new growth. The decrease of that is demolition. Somebody's house burns down, there would be a decrease. We track that because we need it when we're equalizing the properties. Changes in classification is just we're taking it from ag land to commercial land, from commercial land to residential land, vice versa. That's not a new growth number. The land was previously taxed. You've already captured that value in your taxable value that you use as an auditor, but we need to track it for assessors because we have to pull it out of whatever cup we had it in and put it in the right cup. So we use that number, not new growth number. Exempt property change due to new construction or demolition. Again, not a code I've used, but I suppose if you came across a scenario where you would use it, maybe Al, have you ever used that code? No. There's some of these codes we don't use very often. They're not very common. Exempt property changed due to annexation. It wasn't taxed before, it's getting annexed. Say like you had like a city lagoon that was on like a county parcel, but it wasn't being taxed because everybody knew it was a city lagoon, and then you finally annexed it. Well, it's going to be a net zero because it was already exempt because it was being a lagoon, so it's not really a new growth number because you're not adding any value. Other, I suppose that would be some sort of weird scenario that you could use. Never used it, but again, not new growth. The ones in greens are the 3 new growth entries that we do. And the last one that we're going to talk about are TIF new construction. We all know TIFs are kind of their own animal, and the assessors need to track that information. So we thought about using a code that gave a nod to this cap bill. So we put 76 because we figured it wouldn't get mixed up with anything, but that's how we're going to track it for our purposes. The truth is, and Linda Swyhovic helped me with this a little bit more, the new growth construction will not be included in the new growth that we report to you guys to use on your budget calculation worksheet until the TIF expires. And then when the TIF expires, the TIF incremental taxable value will be included as new growth on calculation 2, line 20, expired TIF incremental taxable value on the CAPS calculation worksheet. So basically, because of the TIF and the nature of it and the auditor tracking that information, that data from the TIF, you guys are going to be the one that has that number once the TIF expires. So it will not come from the tax director's office. We will just use it if there's a TIF in place and there's new construction and we need to capture it for our equalizing of market values for what we report to the state to remain in tolerance. So a little bit of extra information for that. So what we are going to report to you, our supplemental abstracts have all of this information, and this is super dry, and I apologize. But when you guys ask for new growth, we are going to report to you the increases for the exempt to taxable, the new construction, and any annexations. That's what we're going to report to you, and we would report it to you by district. So if the school calls and asks me for that, I will get that information from the school district parcels. The county, I provide all of the parcels and send that on. The city, same thing, it would just be specifically for their parcel. All of this information would be available after June. So again, new growth should be available by around June 30th or a little bit after. Depends upon how hairy it is to get all of your information reported to the state, and if you've had time to compile it down to the different taxing districts and the political subdivisions that need that information. The only other thing that might affect it a little bit is what we call omitted property. Some people call them escape assessments. It varies by city and county how you handle them. I know some counties hold hearings. As soon as they've figured out they've missed valuing something that was taxable, they'll send a notice out and hear it at the next commission meeting. In McKinsey County, we do it once. We do it in the first meeting in October, right before the state board finalizes their values. That's kind of the last push to get your tax rolls correct. And we do the hearing the beginning of October, and we would have a little bit of new growth, because the only thing that you can do for omitted property is something that you weren't taxing. Like if you didn't pick up the house in time, but you knew it was there as of February 1st, we would add it in October if we didn't have the assessment complete. The value would be probably minimal and not have a major effect, and that's going to vary from county to county. And then when you're requesting information, just like I said before, most tax directors are going to be aware of the little things that might affect the number that we're giving you for the numbers that we can report to you. So we'll just try to do our best to communicate and keep you posted on what's happening and what can make an impact. Some of us might know June 30th that we don't have any appeals, we're in tolerance, we're good, and we might be able to report pretty confidently to you at that time. Any questions? I know that's super boring.
Katie, I just want to make sure I understand. So if we have a property, say it's been on a business exemption for 5 years, or it's been on a 10-year pilot. Same with the new home construction or the residential remodel. When those exemptions expire, we're going to count that as new growth.
Yes.
For the 3% cap, even if it's 10 years old.
I would say, because new growth would be going from non-taxable to taxable. So when it was part of an incentive program or an 10-year exemption, 5-year exemption, that sort of thing, it wasn't taxable at the moment, but then it's turning to be taxable. So I would probably call that a 1 for a change from non-taxable to taxable.
You didn't touch on this, but the primary and non-primary classification, who's responsible for determining if it's primary or non-primary, and when does that go into effect?
That might be more of a, I feel like it's going to fall on the counties the way I read the bill, but we don't have access to the other piece of that primary residence credit verification that the state does with the income tax and the motor vehicle database. So Shelley, do you have any insight on that? You want to pop up here?
The answer is the County Director of Tax Equalization will need to notify every resident. This is through House Bill 1176. The Director of Tax Equalization will notify every resident of their approval or denial of primary residence credit classification. So you're going to get a list from the State Tax Department that tells you which parcels or applications were approved and which were not approved. And it will be the tax director's responsibility to notify each applicant. And that will go into effect
next year.
Yeah, it'll be for it'll be for tax year 26. So next year.
Just a question, and those of you that were in the room when they were hashing all of the details of this bill out might know better. Are they moving in a direction that property owners that have been approved for the primary residence credit don't have to apply?
I would say there was discussion, and at one point of the bill, there was a version that, or one of the bills, that eliminated the need for an application by identifying a primary residential classification category. There's just no way to do that because it changes all the time. But the way I read the law is once it's determined that it is a primary residential category or classification, it stays that way until the next tax year and the next application process. So I don't know that we were real clear on that during the debate of the bill, but it is pretty clear now that that's the role. So that might be a goal eventually, but it is also that the tax department doesn't have a way to change those classification codes within your tax system, so that was going to fall on the tax directors regardless as well.
I guess my question, that led on to another question. The reason being, like, if you don't have to continue applying, would the county then not, if you've been approved for the primary residence status of your parcel once, and the application process goes away, do we have to continue notifying that the primary residence is on their parcel?
I hear your question, and that is not in the bill. If that were to happen, that might be the outcome, but that's not in the bill right now.
Okay. Any other questions? I said I know it's super dry. There's Al.
I think this is actually a comment to Sandy's question. How that works with exempt growth, it depends on how you count it on the front side.
Yep.
So I count a new construction and an exemption on the same parcel in the first year, so I don't have to count it when it comes off on the 5th year. You're allowed to do that. You can count the new house's growth, and then you can count a negative growth for the exemption. That's how we've been doing it in Burleigh County for 35 plus years. So we would count, that way when it comes off that exemption, we're not tracking, oh, now we got to add that value back onto that house, because we make the adjustments to the house for market separate from that exemption. Does that make sense?
Right. My one question would be, a lot of those new home buyer, new homeowner, new construction exemptions are up to $150,000, right? So you'd have a dollar amount it's just kind of interesting, like, is there a benefit or a detraction to do it either way?
I think now with caps, the benefits to count it on the back, count it on the year it comes off. But before the cap, there was no benefit if your house was over 150,000. It didn't have any effect other than you didn't have to count it twice, basically.
Well, and I think a lot of this stuff, when you talk about new growth and supplemental, and why we even mention the TIFs as well, you don't want to be double dipping, because I think you got to be like very meticulous about how you're handling your new growth numbers so that you're being accurate for our taxpayers.
Yes, I agree. That's correct. I just wanted, so you maybe, Sandy, were thinking years ago, a lot of people I think did them that way, where we counted it as new construction in year one, and we also took away the 75,000 or the 150,000 as a negative.
As being like going from taxable to exempt.
Correct.
Okay. I can see the benefits of doing either. Do you remember how you did it? Any other? She nodded her head. She didn't answer. She remembered how she did it. So,
I guess when I was the tax director, and I believe Melissa's still doing it the same way, say if the house was valued at $300,000, we would put on $150,000 the first time it was occupied, and then 2 years after the exemption expires, we would add then the 150 for the exemption as coded as a 1, and then if it's worth more, anything above that would be a reassessment.
which is just market change.
Yes.
Yes.
And okay.
And that makes sense to me, because you're not taxing it, and then you don't have that decrease line. But I see how the numbers work the way that Al was explaining it too. And the assessors are going to talk a lot more about this in August when we have our annual meeting in lieu of the State Board of Equalization. So some of the devil in the details stuff as far as assessors go will be, even though we've already reported for this year, we're just talking about making sure that everybody has a great understanding of this so that we are providing the best information we can to the auditors and other budgeting entities that rely on our information. Good?
All right, let's give Katie a round of applause. You know, I think it just shows how complex and one-side this new law is when you have the audience asking questions up here and the presenter asking questions of the audience. But it also shows how good this group is, that we can all work together, we can ask questions, and we're all here to learn from one another. So really no question is off limits. And we had one individual ask if the chat is monitored. Yeah, it's monitored by me, so ask your question. So pretty simple. But our next speaker, okay, he looks like somebody I used to know. I still know his brother. But Adam Tesher with the Department of Public Instruction. He's going to come up here and talk about school district mill levy changes and the 60 mill gap funding process. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Again, my name is Adam Tesher, School Finance Officer with the Department of Public Instruction. Just going to go through a few of the changes and how they affect. It's been good to hear these discussions of the valuations and when the final numbers come in, because those will all play into some of these gap funding processes that we have to implement for this upcoming year. I will be the first one to break the rule a little bit, and I'm going to actually start on House Bill 1369. And just because we have school districts and counties here, I thought it'd be important to note in the in lieu of property tax category in our funding formula, the homestead and veterans credit were always included in lieu of property tax. One of our goals going into this session was to align the taxable valuation that the school district or that the county sent to the Department of Public Instruction and send to the tax department align. So if a county has filled out that state form number 9150 with the taxable valuations and the mill levy reports, we always had the gross taxable valuation, then you had to put the veterans and credits to get the net, because we didn't want that veterans and credit homestead valuations included in the taxable value and in the in lieu, because every dollar that's reported to DPI impacts the state aid that's going to go out to school districts. So we don't want to, in essence, deduct them twice. So going forward, when we have that spreadsheet that we send out each fall with the in lieu of property tax deductions, you will no longer see the homestead and veterans credit on there. And our state form number 9150, where we collect the taxable valuation, we will just be doing that gross taxable valuation number rather than getting those veterans and credits pulled out, essentially, veterans and homestead credits. Again, we are still going to collect it, but the goal is to compare our numbers with the tax departments. If we can get those equal across all 53 counties, we're hoping we can just do one property tax collection. One thing to keep in mind for school districts, when we post taxable valuation in Finance Facts, we've always done that net taxable valuation, but because of this change for the 25-26 funding year, you're actually going to see the gross taxable valuation in your worksheet. So they're not going to match what's in Finance Facts and what's on your funding worksheet because of this change, and it'll be that difference of the veterans and homestead credit valuations. So there's really one significant change to school district mill levies. The general fund mill levy has historically been capped at 70 mills. This was split into two different mills. We have the general fund, which 60 mills, which will now mirror our deduct in our funding formula. And that is split between, and then there's an additional 10 mills. So again, the overall 70 is still there. It's just now split into two different categories. They did make a note when they added this that the new 10 mil levy may not be considered new property for that exemption. So because it's just a split, that is not considered new growth, and that will be included in that 3% cap that school districts levy. The idea behind this, it's pretty straightforward. If a school district was levying 70 mills, it's a straight split. You'll have 60 in your general fund and then 10 in your other one. If a school district would have levied 65 mills in the past, it's essentially going to be 60 mills in your general fund, and then that 10 mil general fund will be at 5. And the reason we need to make sure we get that 60 in there is so we get to when we calculate the gap funding, we can do it accurately and ensure that school districts are maxing out that levy to be eligible for their funding. I know there's a presentation after this regarding caps. I did just want to note here as well that tuition levy was exempted from the cap. The tuition levy is used for when school districts have to pay tuition. Maybe they have a student that's placed into a residential facility outside of their school district. There's also the allowability that school districts can levy for tuition for students in grades 7 through 12. And so that cap would have been challenging for a school district like Mapleton that's seeing a lot of growth. They're paying a lot more tuition because they don't have a high school to Central Cass or to West Fargo. And so if they had been capped on what they can pay in that tuition, it would have created significant challenges for that district. And then the gap funding. So the gap funding was put in place because in our funding formula, we pay school districts $11,000 per student. That $11,000 is funded by a combination of state and local taxes. And how the local taxes work is we assume a 60 mil contribution on their taxable valuation. And then we assume, then there's a 75% deduct for all those in lieu of property tax categories that were discussed earlier. So when a school district is unable to get to 60 mills because of this new 3% cap in that general fund 60 mil levy, the formula is still going to assume they're at 60. Ultimately, they won't get their full funding of the $11,000 per student that the legislature promised. So there is going to be an application period for school districts. If they max out their mill levy authority, they go up their full 3% from their adjusted base year or their adjusted year levy, or their base year levy or their adjusted year levy, excuse me, and they still can't get to 60, we will put out an application process so that then we'll use our integrated state aid payment to make that school district whole to ensure they're at that $11,000 per student. The 3% cap is calculated across all the mill levies that the school district has the authority to levy. They could do it in the general fund, the miscellaneous fund, building fund. But because this 60 mills is so unique, because it does tie directly into how much state aid that school district gets, it is a requirement that at least that 60 mills goes up the full 3% allowable that would drive that down. So it's not going to allow a school district to go up 3% overall in their budget and maybe increase their miscellaneous mills 10 and decrease that general fund 60 down to 52. That would make them ineligible for that gap funding. They do need to make that 60 mills go up 3% above the adjusted year levy or that base year levy. To be eligible, you also had to levy 60 mills in the previous year. They did add a caveat onto that if a school district attempted to get to 60 mills, we have 3 or 4 school districts in the state that were at 58.5 or 59 mills. We are going to allow those school districts still to be eligible. But once we start getting down to that, they only levied 55 or less mills. Those school districts will not be eligible for that gap funding. And the reason that was put in, I know we had the conversation earlier with when those tax values changed, and it's kind of estimated up until October to when the actual numbers do come in. If the school district was trying to levy exactly at that 60 mil mark and there was a small change in that valuation, they may have ended up with less than 60 mils. So we will be communicating with school districts, working on a form for them to apply that would show that they maxed out their mill levy, especially on that 60 mil side, and that they're not, shifting from one to another. So the bill does require that those increases must be done proportionately across all the mills. Again, my main focus is making sure the 60 mills is proportionally to all the rest of the eligible mills that are under the cap. Again, we wouldn't include the tuition fund or any district indebtedness levies as part of that proportional calculation. And with that, I can stand for any questions. Quick, sorry. Got you ahead of schedule.
Yeah, that's okay. Yes.
Matt, I just wanted to make one comment about that. So God bless you, school district business managers that have to run these numbers all the time. And thank you, Adam. And then just to comment to running those numbers, I guess it's more important than ever that we all stay in communication with each other and work together, especially working through these first couple of years. Share as much as you can back and forth. And I kind of wondered if did Katie leave? Okay, the tax director's in here. Is it a possibility that something could be posted, or the values could be posted and or emailed, somehow provided to the political subdivisions as you have a pretty good idea, like say by the end of June and then again by the end of July with the centrally assessed, somehow, or you're going to get 5 phone calls from the school, and you're going to get 10 phone calls from the cities. And I'm just trying to think if there's a more efficient way. And you don't need to answer, just planting that seed.
So we're going to get right to it, but we have Linda Swyhovic with the Association of Counties. She's going to step-by-step cap calculation review and discussion. So let's give Linda a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Thanks for sticking around. Can I see a show of hands of just business managers, county auditors, and city auditors? All right, that's who I was hoping would be here today. Thank you for being here. I was listening to a podcast this weekend, and it was a quote I wanted to repeat. Just to give you a little background, the quote is, "You don't get thank you notes for things that don't happen." And it was meant in a positive light. I wanted to say that your member association leaders, your executive directors, and their lobbyist teams worked really, really hard on this bill, House Bill 1176. And there was a lot of things proposed throughout the session that would have made what I call the 69th legislative session's big, beautiful bill. This is their version of a big, beautiful bill. And it could have been a whole lot worse. So when we say you don't get thank you notes for things that don't happen, sometimes not getting a thank you note because something didn't happen is okay. We are, okay, I can see it. We are going to do some very boring, somebody said earlier, this is boring stuff. We're really literally going to walk through math calculations here in the next hour. And please jot down notes. This is not going to make sense to everybody if you don't do this work every day and if you don't talk about these numbers every day. But we really want to make sure if you have questions and we want you at a comfort level, we want to make sure we get those answered. So, House Bill 1176, 69th legislature passed it, a vote of yeas of 132 and only 4 nays. And this was on the final day, I believe, of the session. So if there was a conception out there that somehow we weren't going to have caps at the end of this legislative session, I'm not sure that that vote would support that statement. I think it was kind of inevitable. It did pass or approve a $1,600 tax credit for primary residences. This last year it was $500. They increased that to $1,600. It does cap local government at a 3% growth in dollars levied. We're going to walk through that calculation. And it does allow for unused percentage increase to be carried forward for up to 5 years. And we'll actually walk through what that might look like and a calculation for that as well. Taxing districts are also able to opt out by a majority vote at a general election. So only at a general election, but majority, not a supermajority, so 50 plus 1. We're going to specifically talk about Section 22 in House Bill 1176, and that section is deals with and is titled The Limitations on Levies Without Voter Approval. Property taxes levied in dollars, and this is direct quote from Section 22 in the very first paragraph. Property taxes levied in dollars may not exceed, and here's the key word, the greater of the base year levy increased by the allowable percentage limit or the adjusted year levy increased by the allowable percentage limit. So you're going to have to run 2 calculations to determine which is the greater. What is the allowable percentage limit? In House Bill 1176, that is 3%. Home Rule Authority may not supersede the cap. That's in the bill as well. The unused excess percentage increase, it can be used in any of the 5 succeeding taxable years. It can only be used once, and it may not carry forward beyond 5 taxable years, and you must use the oldest unused excess percentage increase first. For some reason, I had the hardest time with this concept, and thank goodness Danelle put together this little graphic for me to help walk me through it so I could visualize how this would be. So the example is year 1, you actually need a 1% increase
So the excess, you're leaving 2% on the table to be carried forward to the next year. Year 2, you need 2%. So that leaves 1% left unused to carry forward to previous years. And it's a rolling balance, so it accumulates. So the total between year 1 and year 2 is a 3% that you can carry forward to previous years. Year 3, you're going to need 5%. You're going to use the 3 you're allowed plus 2 of those carry forward percentages. And that leaves you a 1% balance, and so on. So this visual was very helpful to me, hopefully helpful to you as well. And we'll talk about how you calculate that unused percentage in a future slide. Okay, a big part of calculating the cap is understanding how many levies are exempt from being capped. And I will just say generally, anything related to debt payment, and we'll walk through the list, but anything related to debt payment, anything related to special assessments, whether it's special assessments on your political subdivision or special assessments that you're paying and collecting from constituents. Anything you levy related to special assessments is exempt from the cap. And any dollars you have levied to pay for debt are also exempt from the cap, and some others. So we'll walk through that list, and there's 3 or 4 pages here. So the first is any new or increased levy authority by either a change in state law, which there was none in this last session, but it has happened. Not for a long time, but it has happened, or any new or increased levy authority approved by voters. So not approved by voters the last election cycle, but approved by voters going forward. So an example of that is there's a county that their voters approved 20 additional mills for their county road. So for a total of 10 are allowed with counties. And their voters approved an additional 20. So they have 30 total mill levy allowance in their county. Their board, being responsible and conscientious, only put 25 mills on last year. Can they go directly to that 30 because the voter approved it? No. The base year was established when they put that last year's is the basis for the 3% cap. So you can't automatically hop to the 30 mills because your voters approved it 2 years ago or last year. Secondly, levy authority increased above 0 mills in the previous year. Okay, it doesn't read exactly like that in the bill. We asked for clarification. Every legislator we talked to, and I think the tax department's in agreement that the way it's worded can make it feel like it says if it wasn't used previously, I believe is how it's worded. The intent of the bill and the interpretation of the bill is if you're at 0 mills the previous year and you have levy authority to go beyond that, those new mills that you're going to use beyond 0 are not capped. Once you put the mills on, going forward, they're subject to the 3% cap. The next one on the list is levies to pay bonded debt. Again, I referenced earlier, anything related to debt. The state medical center is exempt from the caps. They are the only levy authority in all of statute that mandates a mill levy, and it's 1 mill. Everybody else is a not to exceed levy authority. Garrison diversion is exempt from the cap, not to exceed 1 mill. Taxes or special assessments to pay obligations, including for special assessment deficiencies, are not subject to the cap. Taxes levied to pay bonds, evidence of indebtedness, including under Century Code 57-47 by the Bank of North Dakota from the Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. Those levies, those dollars are not subject to the cap. Taxes levied for the cost of a special improvement project are not subject to the cap. And then under one section is a whole bunch of levies listed by Century Code, and this is that list. interpretation of what the Century Code means. The additional levies exempt from the cap are this: city special assessments under 40-2410, city judgments or settlements of claim under 40-4301, the county emergency levy under 57-1528, tax levies for payment of special assessments, again, there's that special assessments under 57-1541, the city emergency levy under 57-1548, levies for the operation of water resource districts in the whole chapter of 61-16.1. So anything related to water resource districts are not subject to the cap. And taxes levied by a school district for tuition under 57-15-14.2 are not subject to the cap. And then lastly, Stephanie was very determined that these two little levies that are expiring this year, they're just related to cities. These two, one time only, animal shelters and fire department buildings or equipment reserve fund are exempt from the cap. They are to be added to the general fund for 2020, this tax year 2025 in an amount equal to what was levied in 2024, and they will be included with the 2025 general fund levy, and that portion will be exempt from the cap for those two levies. And there were only a couple cities, I believe, that were actually utilizing those. Okay, like I mentioned earlier, we have the option to opt out of caps with voter approval. The majority of voters at a statewide general election only. It's good for up to 4 taxable years, and the ballot measure must state the proposed percentage increase exceeding the limitation and the proposed dollar amount of the increase exceeding the limitation. So again, it's good for 4 taxable years, and there's no limit on what you can ask your voters to approve as an opt-out. This was an option that was not in the original bill that was asked for, and I think it was Aaron Burst's idea, if I don't remember. Just give my boss a little credit. Specifically townships. Existing law stays the same regarding township levy limitations, and that is that electors approve levies at an annual meeting in the month of March. The general fund levy cannot exceed 18 mills unless the majority of electors at a township meeting approve an allowance of an additional 18 mills. And that meeting notice must include the question to approve the additional mills, and that is good for the additional mills, so a total of up to 36 are allowed for 5 taxable years. You certify the levy to the county auditor within 10 days after the meeting, and that's under 57-1532. So again, nothing about that and the current practice for townships has changed. However, townships also have the ability to opt out of the caps. And same thing applies. It has to be approved by the majority of electors at their annual meeting. So they don't have to wait for a general election. They have an annual meeting. Their electors can vote at their annual meeting to opt out. It's good for 4 taxable years, like everyone else. And the annual meeting notice must contain those 2 elements, the proposed percentage increase and the amount of increase to exceed the cap. Now we're going to get into the math. Cap calculations, we're going to talk about the maximum levy authority and the percentage increase. So levy authority, nothing has changed regarding existing levy limitations. And that probably sounds ridiculous when we know we have caps. But every levy limitation, 60 mills in a county general fund, 105 in a city general fund, those levy limitations that are established by law still exist. Caps, however, provide for a maximum amount of that a taxing district may levy in property taxes. So it sets a cap to what you can levy, but it doesn't give you authority to go over a maximum mill levy limitation that exists in law. So it doesn't automatically erase all the other levy limitations. And I hope I can explain that clear, because I didn't understand that initially with this bill. So you have all the levy limitations, But if you're at 60 mills in your county general fund and 3% puts you at 62 mills, you can't do that. You can go 3% overall in the dollars you're levying, but that 60 mil levy limitation still applies. Each taxing district is responsible for calculating their own cap and determining the amount of dollars to levy, like you've always done. All existing levy limitations apply. Taxing districts will certify their levy to the county auditors no later than October 10th, like you've always done. County auditors will run the maximum levy worksheets for every levy and every taxing district in the county based on the levy certified by the taxing district. So to answer a question I've been asked frequently, sometimes by a county auditor and sometimes by others, who's responsible for determining whether my city calculated the cap correctly? You are. Not your county auditor. They're not going to run a cap calculation on every political subdivision in their county. So it's good that you're here. It's good that you're listening online because you will be responsible for that portion of your calculation. So we talked a little bit early about may not exceed the greater of. So for caps, there are two calculations. You're going to do a base year calculation and an adjusted year calculation, and we will walk specifically through each of those. So again, the base year levy increased by the allowable percentage, or the adjusted year. It's the greater of those two, and you have to run both calculations to determine which is greater. I've run into one of probably a dozen scenarios that I either asked for from some of you or just ran based on the numbers I could find historically. And all but one, the numbers were different. So there was something greater. One was greater than the other. One, because they actually reported no new growth, the calculation was the same. So definitions, what is the base year levy? The base year levy is the highest amount of property tax dollars levied in the previous 3 preceding years. Very simple. What did I levy last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Your adjusted year levy is the amount of property tax levied in dollars by a taxing district in the preceding year or last year. Adjusted as follows. You're going to add in new property. You're going to add in any expired exemptions, the taxable values for these. You're going to subtract any property removed. And you're going to subtract any expired temporary mill levy dollars amount in dollars. I haven't seen one scenario anywhere in the data that we've got anybody that has an expired temporary mill levy, but it's in the law, so we've allowed for that calculation in the calculation worksheet. So the difference, base year is the highest of the 3 preceding years. Adjusted year is the preceding year with adjustments for new growth. So you don't get to take the growth calculation on the base year calculation. That is just strictly going to look at those 3 years. What did you levy? And then the adjusted year levy. And now the fun begins. I think you guys have handouts on your desk, on your tabletops, and it might help. I don't know how, wherever it's easier for you to see, but we will, I apologize in advance, but we are going to walk through this line by line because I don't know how else, if I was learning this, I don't know how else I could generally explain it without walking through it. So the worksheet that we have prepared works for everybody. You're not required to use this worksheet. We'll provide it to you in an Excel format. It's got some protected cells, in it as well, but it does all the calculations for you. If you plug in anything that's in the blue boxes, it will run all the other calculations for you. You're not required to. If you've got there's more than one way to come up with this calculation and get these numbers. So if you've got another format or your finance director, somebody's already come up with another format, feel free to use it. This is a tool for those who haven't developed or don't have a form created. So we're going to do calculation 1. We're going to do that base year calculation. And on line 1, we're going to list and call it the 3 columns for, and I specifically put this as tax year 24, tax year 23, and tax year 22, because the tax year always lags 1 year behind the budget year. So We're going to look at the previous year levy, which is 24, 2 years ago, 23, and 3 years ago, 22. We're going to list, you're going to have you list the total, on line 1, the total dollars levied on behalf of the taxing district. On line 2 through 11, only those lines that apply to your political subdivision and your taxing district will you fill out. These are the levies that are exempt from the cap. So we're going to subtract those out of those total dollars you levied. On line 12, it's going to calculate that difference. What are the total dollars you levied less a sum of lines 2 through 11. Line 13 then is going to look at the numbers in line 12 and determine which is the highest of the last 3 years. And it's going to plug that number in for you. Line 14 is going to calculate 3% because that is now your base year. And it could be, oh, it doesn't fit on here. Follow your sheets. It doesn't fit on here. Or at least it got cut off when it got printed. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, that's what it is. Okay, that's right. Thanks for helping me through these slides. All right, that's right. This slide is a demonstration of a political subdivision that actually provided me some numbers, including what they're thinking about budgeting this next year. So I just have on this slide an example of what this might look like. This happens to be a school district. They entered into the line 1, the three preceding years, the total dollars they levied. They subtracted out on line 6A the specials on school property, if I remember that's what the levy was. And on line 7, they subtracted out their tuition levy. And it left them with, on line 12, a net difference of 8.7 million, 8.3 million, and 7.7 million over the last 3 years. So, finishing off this calculation, Matt, thank you. Next slide. Lines 12 through 15 do this. They calculate that difference, and it determines which year on line 13 is your base year. And it could be any one of those 3, depending on how your levies have fallen. It calculates 3% of that base year levy. So in this case, it's the 8.7 million, and 3% of the base year levy is 261,000. And it adds that to the 8.7 million. So in this case, the base year levy, adjusted by 3%, is a total of $8,965,000. So that's calculation 1. That's what the base year is. It's the base year, determining what the base year is, adding 3% to it, and that's the base year adjusted by 3%. Calculation 2 is the adjusted year calculation. It's going to pull on line 16 the previous year levy from the numbers you entered on the calculation 1. You have to enter the previous year taxable value. So you're going to have to get that, and I'll share a couple of resources from you, but definitely your tax director would have it if your finance or business office doesn't have it. You can get it from the tax department's tax levy lookup tool, and I'll show you where to find that on the website at the end of the presentation here. And then it's going to do those adjustments on lines 19 through 22. You're going to enter numbers you get from your tax director. You're going to enter the new growth number on the new property value, taxable value on line 19. If you have, and I don't know if that was clear to you all, if you have an expired TIF, that incremental value that you have not had access to in your taxing district because it's been set aside to pay down that TIF, once that TIF expires, your tax director will be able to provide you, and you'll be able to put that value in as an add-on. Line 21 is also any exemptions from the prior year that have expired. And then line 22 is any property removed since the prior year. And you're going to enter taxable values of those. Again, those are numbers. If you don't have them, you won't have these because these are based on the new year, since last year. So these are numbers you're gonna get from your tax director, and again, likely not until end of June, and then with centrally assessed, it would be end of July. So calculation 23 then takes line 19, which was the new property taxable value, plus line 20, plus line 21, minus line 22, and it's going to come up with, it's going to calculate for you a net increase of taxable value that you get to add on for this next year. It's going to calculate the calculated mill rate from the previous year, and I'm sorry, this is complicated. County auditors are like, yeah, I get this, it makes sense. It looks very much like their maximum levy worksheets, but for those of you that don't run this, trust the formula. If you enter the right numbers, it'll do these calculations for you. But it's going to calculate that new growth allowance times the previous year mill rate and equivalent that to a dollar amount that you get to add to the previous year's levy. And so that is on line 26, that is the net adjustment. Line 24 plus line 25, well, that's with the expired growth. Line 27 is the adjusted year levy. It's line 16 plus line 26 because, like I said earlier, I haven't run into one expired temporary mill levy yet. But if you are, you'll have the ability to enter that, and the worksheet allows for it. So on line 27, you're going to get your adjusted year levy. Line 28 calculates 3% of that levy, and line 29 adds that 3% adjustment to the adjusted year levy and gives you a total amount of the adjusted year levy increased by 3%. And here's the example of that calculation. This is that same school district. It pulled that previous year levy from line 12 on the calculation 1. That's $8.7 million. Their previous year taxable value was the year that was used to calculate the previous year mill rate. And then line 18 calculates that mill rate by taking line 16 divided by line 17 times 1,000, and 92 mills it was. And then lines 19 through 22 are their adjustments for new growth on line 19 and property removed on line 22. Line 23 takes the difference between those two. So line 19 minus line 22. So it's $1,037,000 of new growth value allowance. It applies that 92 mill rate, those 92 mills from line 18, and it calculates a dollar equivalent that you get to add to the previous year or preceding year of $95,421. So that's under this adjusted year calculation, that's the additional dollars you're going to be allowed to levy over the preceding year. So line 27 is your adjusted year levy, which is line 16 plus line 26. That's the previous year's levy plus that adjusted year levy. It is line 28 is the 3% adjustment to that, which is $263,000. And line 29 gives you your adjusted year levy increased by 3%. So last year you levied at the very top on line 16, you levied $8.7 million. This year with your new growth, you're going to be allowed to levy under the adjusted year levy $9,063,000. So the formula we'll look at it, the worksheet we'll look at, we're going to go back to the base year dollar allowance increased by 3% was $8,965,000. That's from line 15. Line 29 is the adjusted year levy increased by 3%. That's $9,063,000. It's going to automatically, on line 30, select the higher of those two and tell you what's the max dollars you can levy. $9,063,327. Now, obviously, both in base year and in the base year and in the adjust year calculation, we subtract out anything that any levy that's exempt from the caps. So this maximum is the maximum dollars you can levy in all of the levies except those that are exempt from the cap, that long list of exemptions. So separately, you're going to still run and calculate in your budget and determine what you need in those levies that are exempt from the cap, and those are in addition and above these dollars. Does that make sense? That these dollars in this calculation only apply to the levies that are subject to the cap. Separately, you will still calculate and run and levy for any levy that is not subject to the cap. And those are in addition to those dollars. Have I lost everybody? I'm looking at the auditor to see if it makes sense. Okay, I got a thumbs up from one. Okay, the last calculation on the worksheet is calculation 3, which calculates the excess percentage increase for future periods. Line 31 takes the tax year 20. How many dollars, capped dollars, not all of the levies, but how many capped dollars do you intend to levy for this next year, for tax year 25? You're going to enter that in line 31. Line 32 through 43 is any levies that are exempt from the cap. So the total dollars you're going to levy, I think I might have said that wrong in the first, but the total dollars you're going to levy go on line 31. Anything exempt from the cap, you will subtract out in lines 31 through 43. And line 44 will calculate the difference of that total on line 31, less all of those levies that are exempt from the cap, and that's line 44. It'll calculate an unused cap amount, and it does the calculation based on whether you used whether the higher was the base year levy or the adjusted year levy. It will calculate that for you. And it will calculate a percentage based on which one of those you use that is a minimum of 0% and a maximum of 3%. So here's what calculation 3 looks like for this school district. Their total dollars they plan on levying for tax year 2025 for their 2026 budget is $9,962,000. Again, this school district levies for special assessments on school property on line 38A. So there's $285,000 they anticipate for that. And on line 39, they are subtracting out what they anticipate levying of that total for tuition. And on line 44, it gives them a net of $8,988,000. This is for the calculation of the unused percentage, which means, let me see if I can go back. Can I go back one? I can't go back. One more. I don't know what I'm pointing at. Oh, okay, that works. So they were eligible for $9,063,000. When you do the calculation on the unused cap calculation 3, they're only going to be levying $8,988,000. So I don't want to say leaving it on the table. There's $74,594 of unused cap increase allowance. That calculates out to 0.85%. They can carry that 0.85% forward for the next 5 years. Next steps. You're going to complete a separate cap calculation worksheet for any levies that are not applied entity-wide. So an example is an ambulance district, unorganized township roads, vector control. There might be others. Some airports only apply to certain levies and not, or certain values, certain properties, and not others in your political subdivision. So you're going to have to know which ones apply countywide, that's natural for me to say, entity-wide, And that taxable value applies to all of the taxable value in your taxing district. For anything that applies to less than your total taxable value in your taxing district, you'll have to run a separate cap calculation worksheet for that, for any of those. You're going to review your proposed levies for your preliminary budget. You're going to verify that the amount of levy falls within that cap allowance. And all existing reporting requirements and deadlines still apply, except political subdivisions under House Bill 1176 no longer provide preliminary budgets and a certified levy to the county auditor by August, it says first, by August 10th. You've done that since 2017, I believe, because House Bill 1176 eliminated the estimated notice that goes out in August and replaced it with a budget hearing notice. So you do not need to provide the county auditor with your preliminary budget or your certified levy in August any longer. The next slide for House Bill 1176 will go through the budget hearing notice. So that was replaced instead with the language requires on or before August 10th. A preliminary budget statement is to be prepared by the governing body. So I had a question on a webinar I did for counties a couple weeks ago, and they said, where does it say when counties have to have it done? This statement is what we were told applies to all taxing districts. And the statement in the bill reads, preliminary budget statement is prepared by the governing body, that's all governing bodies, by August 10th. A public budget hearing date is set by August 10th, and it can't be any sooner than September 7th and no later than October 7th. Political subdivisions will provide to the county auditor a notice of the public hearing date, the time and location of the budget hearing, and where the budget can be reviewed. And that is to be provided to them now by August 10th. You do not need to provide your preliminary budget or your certified levy by August 10th, but you do need to provide the budget hearing information. And this is the two sections of code that I'd like to share with everybody whenever I have an opportunity. You still are required, though, to provide the county auditor with your certified levy by October 10th. So as it says here, I got to read here. No taxing district may certify any taxes or amend its current budget, and no county auditor may accept a certification of taxes or amended budget after the 10th day of October of each year, if such certification or amendment results in a change in the amount of tax levied. The current budget, except for property taxes, may be amended during the year for any revenues and appropriations not anticipated. The exception to that, and this has not changed that I'm aware of, Adam, is in 57, 15, 13 school districts, because of that funding formula, are allowed to, they may increase or decrease their levies up to October 10th. So for all other political subdivisions, what you approve in your preliminary budget is the maximum you can spend and the maximum you can levy in taxes. School districts can actually increase it because you heard today those values fluctuate a bit. They're allowed to try to get to that full 60 mills the best way they possibly can, and so they have to take advantage of the true, real, actual value. So that's one little thing. So links and resources. There's my friend in the back. A very important one, the North Dakota Levy Limitation Schedule. Can we click on that first link? Okay, and just kind of scroll down to the middle of the page here. If you're not familiar with this will be updated by the tax department. Every odd year after the legislative session ends, the tax department updates this publication. This publication contains the levy authority for every single political subdivision in the state. It tells you what levies are available to you. It tells you exactly whether or not you need to have a vote to utilize those levies, or it's your board's authority. You're going to want to really be familiar with this publication if you aren't already. The second link is the tax department's tax levy lookup tool, which is where I have pulled almost all of the data to prepare and create scenarios to prepare for today's presentation. If you would click, oh no, this is maximum levy worksheets. I'm sorry, I saw it say tax department. Maximum levy worksheets. If you would click on the first line there, the plus sign to the right, yep, of maximum levy worksheets, correct. There's a list of the maximum levy worksheets. These will also be updated by the tax department very shortly here, so you'll have the most current ones. I can tell you that I don't think a lot has changed on them, if anything, that I'm aware of. So if you're trying to get ahead of the game here, you can definitely look at that. But these are the sheets that the county auditors fill out for every single political subdivision, every taxing district in their county. And this is where the actual mill rate is calculated that gets input into their tax system and gets applied to the valuations. Okay, the last link is the tax department's tax levy lookup tool. Okay, scroll, the link will take you to the State Board of Equalization page. My understanding is that the tax department is updating their website, and this might move. I'm a little worried about that, but this is where it is as of now, and it's not easy to find, so it'd be nice if it moved to a more convenient place, but we all need to know where you move it to. So if you scroll to the bottom of the tax equalization page, the top thing says tax levy lookup tool. Go ahead and click that. And it's going to bring you to this screen where you can select 1 year or multiple years. I believe there is a history of data, tax levy data, back to 2015 or 16 for every single political subdivision. And you can look at it for all schools. You can look at it for a particular school. You can look at it for 1 or 2. I think you can compare up to 2 years, or you can look at all the years. And then you can export that data into an Excel spreadsheet and use it however you want to use it. I bet there's hardly a day goes by that I don't access that. So that link will be provided. It's on the last page of this handout as well. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. But boy, oh boy, I'm sure looking forward to questions. From everyone except Erica. I know.
2 clarifying questions first, Linda. Thank you for the information today. The first one, the levy authority for above 0 mills. So if I have 0 mills in my county extension fund for this year, next year I could go to 2 mills. If I went back to 0 in the following year, would I be able to go to the full 2 mills after that? It's just the preceding year, correct? It's not since this year.
That's a great question, and we've been asked that a number of ways, and I can't wait for the attorney panel to get up here to see those executive directors to see how they answer this. Theoretically, yes. If you go back to 0, you can go up to whatever the maximum levy authority is under the limitation schedule. And if you go back to 0 the following year, you can go up to the maximum again after that.
Second clarifying question, townships are the only taxing district that can opt out. Every other taxing district is subject to the caps, correct?
No, that is not correct. Every political subdivision has the ability to go to a vote of the people to opt out. Townships, however, unless they're planning on exceeding their levy authority and by 3%, they don't need to wait till a general election or go to a general election because they have a vote every single year. So they can, at their annual meeting, they can vote. They don't have to wait till the general election.
So the fire district annual meeting, they can't opt out. They would have to go to a vote at a general election.
They also convene their members at an annual meeting, I believe. Here's what I'll say, because I don't want to misspeak. If you vote on your levies at an annual meeting, if your electors vote on your levies at an annual meeting, you would have the ability to vote at that annual meeting to opt out. You would not need to wait till the general election. But if you're a fire district and electors aren't gathered together once a year or any other political subdivision, and I'm not certain on which ones are besides townships. Townships are the only one that are called out specifically in the bill. So if you're a political subdivision that brings your electors together at an annual meeting, you could use the annual meeting to do the opt-out vote, is what I'm saying. If fire districts don't bring their electors together annually to vote on levies or any other political subdivision, they would have to have it at a general election.
And then the third question, which may be the most challenging of my questions anyway. What is the remedy? Since the county auditors are not policing the cap calculation, every political subdivision is responsible for calculating their own caps, but the county auditors are the ones that are collecting the taxes and determining the mill rates. What is the remedy for a taxing district that does not calculate their caps correctly? And how is that fixed? Is it fixed in a future year, or is the county going to have to do like refunds? Mm-hmm. Do we know, is that a question for the attorneys? I'm just thinking of all these scenarios out there for the remedies. Yeah. If there's something, or who is policing the calculations if there is an entity that's doing that?
I will answer that question and then tell you that please ask it again when the attorneys are up here. But in my opinion, the bill is silent on that. There's nothing in the bill that stops a county auditor from assisting with or preparing cap calculations for every political subdivision, but it is not your responsibility. I understand why you maybe would want to. And I think for some of our really small cities and maybe new city auditors, new business managers, this is a lot. And they're maybe going to need some help. These are numbers that county auditors are familiar with working with and finding and getting and using for calculations. So I would guess in most counties that county auditors will be helping the other political subdivisions with those calculations. But the bill is silent on what happens if it's not done right or it's ignored. I would hate to find out at the next session what happens.
Thank you for the information, Linda. I have a few questions. The number that's used to calculate the base year, is it the net amount or the gross amount? We use different ones on the mill levy certification sheets, which do not include the homestead credit and veterans credit. And then on our abstract, it does include the homestead credit and veterans credit. So which dollar amount are we using?
If I'm not mistaken, on the maximum levy worksheets, the value does include the homestead and the veterans credit values. It might be the opposite. So whatever value you use to calculate that mill rate that's applied to all the values, that's the same value you use. So the answer is the value you use on your maximum levy worksheet, which includes the homestead and veterans credit value.
The values, but the dollar amount that we're using to calculate the cap, which amount do we use, from the mill levy sheet or from the abstract? Because they're different. Your mill levy sheet.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So which amount you use? I have to think about that. But I do think we'd use what's on the maximum levy worksheet because that's where the actual mill rate is calculated. That's where I'd get the number from.
But the number that they're going to pull off of the state's website is going to be from our abstract.
On the TLR, though, those numbers should match the tax levy reporting tool. Those numbers should match your maximum levy worksheets. I would say what we found is not everybody is probably reporting that correctly, but most, 95% are, and the state tax department's really good about calling and saying something doesn't look right here. But yeah, it should be, the TLR should match your maximum levy worksheets for the most part.
My other question is farm to market is repealed and it'll end this year for everyone. We decided to, in 2024, still levy farm to market. So is that considered new even though we voted on it 2 years ago? Would that, our 20 mil county road instead of our 10 mil county road and 10 mil farm to market, is what we'll be doing in 2025.
I'm not sure I'm following. I understand
it
what
a
you're
new
saying about
levy?
you have a levy. So farm to market is a levy that expired. It was allowed.
Right.
Back in 2015, you could use it for 10 more years. It's one of the road levies for counties that's expiring. This is the last year you can use it.
Right.
You did levy for it somewhere last year.
We levied.
So you're going to pull that number in at either calculation. You're going to pull that number in as a dollar you levied the previous year.
Correct.
And you'll have those dollars. If you're going to move that now to a different mill rate or mill levy number, you're going to move it to county road and bridge instead. You've got the dollars to work with.
Is the new 10 mills that's added to the county road and bridge subject to the cap?
If you didn't levy for them last year, it's the cap is based on the dollars levied the previous year. If it's a new 10 mil that you approved and you didn't use it last year, you're kind of out of luck.
So
unless your measure said effective tax year 25.
So last year we levied 10 mills in the county road to bridge. This year we have the authority to levy 20.
Correct.
Are we able to do that?
Yeah, yes. Because you're going to
It's
move the
not.
10 mills you levied in farm to market to county road and bridge. So, yeah. Yep, they'll be in there. When you run your calculation, call me.
Okay.
I'll show you.
My other question is, we share a library with another county.
Yeah.
And we have an agreement that we both levy the same mills, no matter what it shakes out to be. So do we use our numbers collectively like we have in the past, or do we do them separately?
I would say just like a health district,
Mhm.
you'll run those valuations together. What's the budget dollars they need, and you will both use whatever the mill rate is.
Okay.
But that you will run, that's one of those ones that isn't going to apply countywide. It's not going to apply to entity-wide. So you're going to run a separate cap calculation on anything that isn't applied to all of the values in the county.
Okay. The 10 mills that we're allowed to hold for the emergency fund, that did not change.
If you look at the emergency fund, it is there are thresholds built within the levy limitation. And as long as you meet that threshold, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, you're fine. That's why it's not capped, because the idea is that you have an emergency, you deplete it, the emergency levy allows you to get those dollars back to where they need to be or what the law allows.
And if a township had previously levied to go over the 18 mills, does that stand, or do they need to revote this year, even though their meetings were held in March?
If the township voted this last March, like March of 25, to exceed 18 mills by another 18 mills, that allowance would be considered new levy authority.
Since it was before.
So that would be exempt.
And then do they have 18 mills? At a meeting, so I've had this question before from my townships, it states in the law, electors at the meeting. So some of our townships have 5 people at the meeting. That is fine, right? They don't have to have a majority of the people living in their township, just whoever is at the meeting.
That's my understanding. And I've got township guy nodding back there saying yes.
Just clarifying. Thank you.
Hello, Sam. I have another township question. So let's say typically most of my townships here, they try to hit that 18 mills max levy. Is there a limit on that this year? If they want to go ahead and hit that 18 mills again this year like they did last year, do I have to take that 3% into consideration as well?
You're not going to take the 3% for townships into consideration. That is their job. And their electors approve at their annual meeting what they're going to levy. So every year, the annual meeting is essentially considered an election to set their levies. So I don't want to say they're exempt from the cap, but they kind of are.
All right, thank you.
Are we good?
Linda, I got some questions for you online. Are you ready for more?
Yeah.
All right.
let's see here. So would finishing a previously unfinished basement and other interior modifications be considered new construction for growth?
That is a great question, and it is a tax director question, and I am not a tax director. So, Shelley, what would do you have is finishing a basement, an unfinished basement, would that be considered under the, yeah. We'll write that one down, and we'll get back, because that's just not my area.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a few about ambulance districts, and I think it addresses the same question, but how do newly formed ambulance districts comply with this? For instance, if the voters previously approved 15 mills for an ambulance service, do we keep with the 15 mills previously approved?
That's a great question. So the way ambulance districts read is their voters can approve, no matter what the measure says, the century code says cannot exceed 15 mills. So depending on when they implement that, their first mill levy, when they form the ambulance district, that's going to set their base year in dollars for the cap, regardless of what that mill rate is calculated out to be. If it's 15 mills and their valuation goes up, it's kind of like those dollars that those mills generated is what the cap will be based on, not the mill rate. And nobody is entitled to an automatic 15 mills, even if the vote said that. The only entity entitled to a mill rate, regardless of what happens with value, is the state medical center.
And then just the other question to that is, if you're forming a new ambulance district, do they fall under the levy exemption from caps?
The first year of implementing that ambulance district levy would be that first exemption falling under new or voter approved levy. Yeah, that would be exempt. You can put on whatever dollars they need to within the 15 mil or whatever their voters approved. We have some ambulance districts that their voters didn't approve full 15 mils. So whatever that is, that's your levy limitation for your ambulance district. You can put those full dollars on.
So just to clarify, there's a few questions on here, but just to make clear, any voter approved levies are okay that first year they're passed, but after that, they're subject to the cap.
Correct.
Okay. That's all of them online.
Nice. Okay.
Sorry.
Good hustle, Steph.
Can you clarify what we have to turn into the counties by August 10th? You said not the preliminary budget, but a statement?
Just a notice of some kind, and I don't think it says it has to be emailed or whatever. You have to provide the county auditor in some form the date of your hearing, the location, the time, date, and location of the hearing, and where your preliminary budget can be reviewed. That's all you have to provide by August 10th.
I have a quick question about townships. So it says in here can opt out the cap for up to 4 taxable years. Does that mean they vote on it one time and can make that for 4 years, or do they vote at it every annual meeting for 1 year each time?
My understanding of the opt out would be you vote on it once and it's good for 4 years. For up to 4 years. It doesn't have to be, it's not required, it's up for up to 4 years. So if you have a special project and you need to opt out for 2 years, whatever your vote language said.
Linda, we have a dissolution of a school coming in, and our problem is it's going to be coming in from 2 different counties. Is that going to be considered new growth, number 1? And number 2, where are we going to get that dollar amount? Who's going to give us that dollar amount for that money, for that land coming in from 2 different counties?
See me looking at Adam, making eye contact with Adam. That's a great question. I know there's couple other school dissolutions. I have an idea in my head, but I don't know for factually that it's correct. So I think we should follow up with that afterwards. I'm assuming they add a taxable value, you have a taxable value. They levy dollars and you levy dollars, and you're going to combine that together, and that's your basis. going forward.
It's going to be divided amongst like 7 other schools. So, I mean, the number, like, I don't know how we're going to get those numbers when the land itself is being dissipated between different districts.
Well, I hope you have a good tax director, because your tax director will have every one of those parcels. They'll have each one of those parcels in that original school that's being dissolved will have a code of which school district they belong to, and now they'll be split up to different schools. So your tax director is going to have to make those changes within your property tax system, and then your system should be able to calculate out the value for each, including the new value for each of those school districts. But that's a really good question, and I'd say something we probably want to walk through with you.
Quick. So we've had a lot of good discussion today, and it's clear that there's a lot more to learn and a lot more questions to ask. I think our next panel is a good one for the people in the room and online. Don't forget, if you're online, to ask questions. I wrote down some of the ones that we asked Linda, so we have some primer for them. Hopefully they were listening. But the other thing we've talked about as a political subs group is providing a FAQ, questions from today or other ones that we receive with some answers. So even after today, if your question doesn't get answered or you think about something when you get home, please reach out to your association that you're a member with, and we'll be sure to add that to the FAQ when we get to that point. But without further ado, I want to introduce our Q&A panel. So we have Aaron Burst with the North Dakota Association of Counties, the Executive Director. We have Stephanie Dassinger-Engebretson with the North Dakota League of Cities. She's a Deputy Director and our staff attorney. Then Amy DeCook with the North Dakota School Boards Association, also the Executive Director. So let's give them a round of applause. All right, so lots of discussion today. What do you think? Think it went well so far? So I'm going to start with questions I heard them drill Linda on. And Linda, bless your heart, you did pretty good on those. I was impressed. I would have deferred to my attorney, I think, most of the time. So let me see here. No mills. So the township question. A township officer asked about the 4-year opt-out provision. And maybe Aaron Burst, I'll put you on the hook for this one. But in my opinion, townships may not need to ask for a 4-year exemption, just because of what the legislature passed. So maybe Aaron, just explain how that would work to townships.
Well, hey everybody. Good to see everybody. First, Keith Peach, stand up. That's Keith Peach. He's the director of Insurance Reserve Fund, which is critically important for all of us, because when we mess this up, he's got to bail us out. So you're going to want to make sure you get to know that guy. He's a heck of a guy, by the way.
But don't mess up, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
Don't mess up. Okay, on the township thing, that is, and I might have a little bit of a disagreement with Linda, who is phenomenal, by the way, on that last question. To me, look at page 22. The only political subdivision recognized as having the yearly vote not to be within the caps is townships. So I don't believe ambulance districts, fire districts have that option. They have the option in section 3B to go on a statewide ballot to get over the caps. But townships have the ability at their annual meeting. I quite frankly think that's kind of weird, because if they're coming in anyway at their annual meeting, I don't know why you would gift yourself a 4-year window or whatnot. But that's the way the law ended up reading. Again, the only thing to remember there is you have to then tell those members, the township members, what the increase is going to be and what the 3% cap would have been. So you have to publish that to your township members. But they are an exception to all the rest of the political subdivisions. Now, again, maybe there is something we're not quite thinking about, but I don't find that specific for the ambulance fire in the bill.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So then we had this question online about for calculating new growth, with finishing an unfinished basement. Anybody on the stage want to approach that question? No takers, it looks like.
Matt, let me just say this, kind of leading off on that. All three of us have been working on that. Well, all of us, the whole crew at the association, the league, everybody, school boards have been working hard. There is no way in this amount of time we can definitively answer all of your questions, because quite frankly, there's a bunch that won't be answerable, at least in this amount of time. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a frequently asked question page on all of our associations, or at least somehow consolidate that. So keep those questions coming, and all we can do is continue to try our best to answer them. It's always a little weird because attorneys, we technically don't represent your political subdivision, but we also don't want 53 different states attorneys coming up with 53 different legal opinions. So we're going to try to consolidate that and respect everybody's authority as much as possible, but keep those frequently asked questions coming. That will be one of them that we'll have to get to.
All right, go ahead, Linda.
Any new construction that's added in any year to an existing property or a property that didn't exist before is new growth. So if they added basement finish, that value didn't exist the year before, so it gets to be counted as growth. It's only when you do a reassessment project that you raise value that it's not counted as growth, because that portion of the property existed in the previous year. It was taxed in the previous year.
Thank you, Burleigh County Tax Director Al Vietmeyer.
All right, thank you, Burleigh County. Stephanie, you look like you had something to say. Any comment on that?
I was just going to say we're getting help from the audience.
Oh,
great. This is phone a friend.
Yes, thank you, audience. Maybe we should have you up here. Anyways, so then we had a question over here. I'm understanding my notes finally, but if you had no mills on something before, then you start levying mills on it, and then it goes back to zero. When you try to get it back on the books, what do you do in that case?
So I think the law does allow for, if in a certain mill levy fund, if it is zero at the previous year, to go to the max that year. I think that is some flexibility that the legislature is trusting us with. And I think if it is used in a way that is abusive, or to play games, or to try to inflate a mill levy beyond that cap, that we are going to see ramifications of it in the next legislative session. So I think there is the technical aspect of this, that yes, technically that's allowed, but there's also the political answer to this, that is, be careful with it. We trust you all. You all are representing the people that were elected and doing the technical work. But if it is abused, we're going to hear about it and likely get that authority taken away in the next legislative session.
I want to just jump on that a little bit. The origin of that whole provision in the bill came about because when they first said 3% cap on your property tax portion, there are a number of counties that have oil revenue coming in and were able to bring their property tax general fund down to zero. So our pitch was, how could you have 3% on zero? So that was the concept where they said, okay, you're going to get a time where you can get your mills to bring it to what you need to, and that starts the 3%. So in my opinion, the spirit of that was for a one-time strategy for when you were zeroed out. If you're going back and forth to zero something out so then you can go to 20 later on, first off, your voters are probably not going to like it anyway. But I do fear that there would be ramifications coming back next time around. Not suggesting you would do it for, not having a good reason, but it's something to consider.
And I'll just add too, on behalf of schools, on that piece of it, because technically I think we all agreed the language of the law allows you to, if you were zeroed out the year before, you can max it out. It's not subject to the 3% cap. However, we've gotten a clear message from the state leaders that they are watching, and if we are, let's say for example, for schools, if you're levying 8 mills in your miscellaneous fund, and you say, oh, I'm going to zero it out this year so that I can max out the full 12 the following year, that I think is, if they see that practice happening, I think we're going to see some pushback even harder next session. So what we've been how we've been talking about this issue with school districts is that if it's part of your planning where you may have used levying authority some time in the past and haven't been using it for the last few years, I think the law would allow you to max out those levies in that fund and wouldn't be subject to the 3% cap for that first year. It would be included in your calculation after that year and would be subject to the cap. There really isn't a, sweet spot really on whether it's going to be determined to be playing games or not, but I think just be really thoughtful about how you are using that authority that's given to you.
And that goes to the next question we received was, what's the remedy for political subs that don't calculate their cap properly? I mean, there's the law truly silent on it, and then there's the other ramifications, which all three of you, or both of you were just discussing. Anybody want to shine some light on that?
Well, I don't think there is not a penalty that's provided in 1176, and I don't believe there's a penalty that was in existing law either. We've had school districts that have inadvertently levied dollars that they weren't authorized to levy, and there really isn't a specific remedy or a penalty in the law to essentially correct that mistake other than don't do it going forward. I think there's an abatement process that is allowed, that there is allowed for a property owner to make a complaint or bring a petition to the county commission if they feel that their property has been not taxed appropriately. I think in years past when a mistake has been made, the state tax office, commissioner's office has said that might be a path to correct it. But I believe that only applies to the previous tax year. So if it's been happening for a handful of years or more, it doesn't really provide a remedy for that entire amount that may have been mislevied. So I guess the short answer is I don't believe there is a specific penalty or a remedy under the law that would apply specifically. That's my opinion.
Okay, any other color?
I agree. I think the main enforcement mechanism is going to be political. It's your voters. You all have sat through this. It's incredibly complicated. But I think if your voters find out that you are over levying or especially purposefully over levying, there's going to be ramifications for your elected officials. And I've seen similar situations in cities where they levied over their authority, and what ended up happening in those cases were the expectation was in the next year that they would correct that and put that money aside so that they had it for the next period or the next budget year. So I don't think that there is a specific legal remedy to correct this either, but I do think your voters are going to be keeping an eye on this.
When we've had school districts that have voluntarily returned improperly levied dollars to their property taxpayers. That's been kind of a voluntary decision.
Even without the 1176, the remedy is always the problem when it comes to taxation. So let's say you did over levy, and that happens, assuming it's not intentional. Who gets the credit? How do you write the check back, even if you did have that money? If somebody just moved into town, do they get the credit? So just the remedy is almost impossible. So really you trust the voters to take care of the issue if it looks like somebody is just incompetent or intentionally misrepresenting what they should be doing. I would guess the state auditor would have a nasty report on you that would go out to the taxpayers. I don't know of any taxpayer specific cause of action to try to get their money back if you overcharge them. They certainly could have some sort of injunction to stop you from doing it before you collected it, but I don't see what the long-term remedy would be.
Yeah, good answers from three attorneys. So one thing I think about with the court of public opinion is this is a 3% cap, but it's not a 3% cap on every parcel. And it's not per parcel either, it's on the budget. So as we think of communication and dealing with the public, that's something that everybody here definitely needs to be communicating. So now it's time for you to answer questions or ask questions, and they'll answer. So are there things that came up today that you didn't get answered. I mean, this is something online too. I can look any question that you have. Maybe while you're thinking of it, anything that you heard today that you'd like to address further?
Well, yeah, a lot, but the lodge is right next door, so.
We'll let Aaron go first, then we'll get over here.
I do want to bring this because I do have it on my notes, and I don't know what the right way to do this is yet, but we need to figure out a way to document the impact of 1176. As of right now, the execs here are thinking of ways we can get data from you, because ultimately, whether this is positive or negative, I know legislators are going to want to know how this happened. Now, it's a little more difficult because you're trying to prove something in the negative, so I'm not sure if I need a lot of emails saying my commissioner was going to give me a 10% raise but only gave me 3 because of the cap. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily helpful, but maybe if you said we had a motor grader every 3 years we traded it in because that's our lease schedule, and now we have to go to 5 years or something because we can't make the numbers work, that will be helpful. Hopefully we can just basically design a system where it's a log in and put your concerns or those kind of things, and then we'll consolidate it and then get that information to the legislature. That's going to be my number one takeaway for all of us, is what is the impact on how this works.
Go ahead, Linda.
So in my conversation with Linda this week, or last week, the question is on the long-term, on the debt repayment that is excluded. Does that include like your you just talked about leases on motor graders. So on my long-term debt with the state auditors, my 3 leases on motor graders are part of my long-term debt worksheet. Does those repayments also get excluded on that calculation? Just bond payments or bond and lease payments?
Wanda, that's a great question. I'm looking through it. Again, if you're following the bill, page 21, section 22 is basically the section we're living and dying in. I don't believe if you're paying off something non-voter approved bond-wise that it falls within those categories. I'd have to think a little closer on that. It could be taxes levied to pay bonds, evidence of indebtedness, obligations. Those are very specific and not just paying off your motor grader lease. Now, in theory, I suppose, judgments, and that is 2I section, judgments are exempt from the levy. So I suppose in theory, you could stop paying and Caterpillar sues you and they get a judgment. I suppose you could do that, but that's not great either.
A new style repayment plan.
I love the attorney advice there.
So
Yeah.
I think this is an area that is a bit unclear in the bill. I think what they had intended to say was that property tax that was pledged to pay indebtedness would be what is exempted under this. That's not what the language says. It says dollars that are levied to pay bonded indebtedness, certificates of indebtedness. So I think this is kind of one of those gray areas that you likely, if it's an area you want to get into and need to use, you probably need to get specific advice from your particular attorney on whether they are interpreting it, because I do think that that is a potential gray area.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? No, Stephanie or Amy, anything you'd like to say from what you heard today, or points you'd like to make?
Well, I think this has probably been cleared up, hopefully, today just by the discussion. But I think throughout the legislative session, there was this idea that voter-approved levies were exempt from the caps. And that is not a general proposition that's supported by the bill. How that comes into play for school districts is our building fund levy is a voter-approved levy. But it is not exempt from the caps. It is subject to the 3% cap. Now, we get we have the authority to levy up to 20 mills for our building fund. And so if your district has never asked for authority to levy for your building fund, and you go to the voters and ask for levying authority, that new levying authority would be exempt for the first year that you levy it. And then after that, it would be included in your calculation for the 3% cap. If you've had authority to levy 10 and you've only levied 8 and you decide you want to max out, that 2 additional levy isn't new or increased levying authority. You already had that levying authority. And so that would, that 3% cap could limit your ability to capture those two more mills. If you've had authority to levy 10 and you go to your voters and want to increase that to the full 20 and they approve that, the first 10 is subject to the caps, but the new 10 that you're levying wouldn't be subject to the cap that first year. So that's a question that I've gotten a lot from school districts trying to understand this bill, that there's this general proposition that voter approved levies are not subject to the caps. Now, we also have a provision, I think that's only applicable to school districts, that you can exceed your levying authority for up to 10-year period with voter approval. And we have, I think, 2 districts that still levy beyond. If I'm right, Brandt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but those are not exempt from the 3% cap either. And so that's just something to keep in mind. I just wanted to dispel the general proposition that voter approved levies are not subject to the cap.
The question that I have is it's 3% in whole. So in other words, if you were at 60, I'll use schools again, that's 60 general fund, and you're at 8 miscellaneous and 5 building fund, could you take 5 from your miscellaneous, assuming you have 10, 5 from your miscellaneous and move it to the building fund? Is that correct? You can move among that as long as you're within the 3% total calculation.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with that. The only thing I would say is, building fund is the purposes for which you can use the funds are limited. So I would see that it would maybe go the other way, where you would move mills from your building fund to your miscellaneous, so that you have more options to use those dollars. But yes, it could go either way, because the cap is calculated on the total dollars levied. Yeah.
100% agree with that. On a 30,000 foot level, it's the total mills. As long as you're not interfering with other laws that were on the books on how to spend those mills, yeah, you would have that flexibility. 100% agree.
Go ahead.
So I'm a superintendent, so when we calculate our 3% overage, do we need to do that for each one of our individual levies, building, miscellaneous, or it is just the total amount?
Just the total dollars levied.
To me, when Linda was explaining this, I almost kind of got chills, because it's kind of like how I do my federal taxes. In a way, it really is, right? You get your gross income, and then you get your adjusted gross income after taking off your deductions, and then you get your total tax bill, and then you get your credits. So I think that is just kind of how it ended up working. So if you think of it like that, it makes a lot more sense.
Go ahead, Adam.
Just to comment on the last question about the overall, just keep in mind the gap funding, that if it does require you to go less than 60 mills, you do have to also reduce those other ones proportionally. And again, I'm just going to look at particularly the 60 mills and the rest of them. So if you switch between your building fund and your miscellaneous, that's not as important. But as long as that 60 mills isn't going down more than the rest of your discretionary mills.
And Adam, really the gap funding was to capture the situation where your values are increasing beyond the 3%. And so it's pushing that 60 mil general fund levy down below 60, but yet we're still deducting or reducing your state aid payment, or assuming that there's a 60 mil contribution from the local side. And so that's the whole purpose. So if the reason your 60 mil general fund levy is decreasing is because essentially your property tax values are pushing that 60 mil fund down. Right, that's really the only time that 60 mil or that gap funding program should kick in.
Yes,
that right?
that is correct. So I just want to make that clear that if you're only levying 6 mills in your miscellaneous and you decide to move that to 12 and you're 60 down to 54, you can do that. You're just not going to be eligible for the gap funding for those 6 mills.
Good.
All right, another question on the county side. So when I'm looking at this 3% cap, do I need to split that out from, do I need to do separate calculations for my general fund levy versus my road and bridge levy versus, for instance, my veteran service levy? Or do I take the whole lump sum as a whole? Do I calculate it per levy?
I'll leave the specific details to Linda on that, but generally it doesn't matter how you come up with that number as long as the total number is not more than 3%.
I would, in answer to your question, Aaron's right. It's on the total dollars for, but if you want to in your county look at individual levies, the general fund separate, and kind of monitor it that way, you certainly can. But the calculation is on the total dollars. Now, if I remember in Burley County, you've got quite a bit of unorganized township road levy. That you'll have to calculate separately because it doesn't apply to, it's not a county-wide entity. So you'll do that separately on unorganized township road. But otherwise, I forget if you had another. You might have had one other that was, yeah. But yes, yes, it's on the total.
One thing kind of along that line for cities, included within your capped mills are going to be the library fund, the cemetery fund, and the airport fund. So those are independent boards that, as I understand how most cities are operating, like the library board comes in and asks for their 4 mills and assumes that they're going to get a total of 4 mills. This changes that. So they're going to be calculated in your 3% cap, and you're going to get a total amount of dollars on all those capped levies, and it's going to be up to your city governing board to determine how to split out those dollars. So I think if I were with a city, I'd be communicating with those I'm going to call them sub boards, to make sure that they understand that there is no guarantee that they're getting their full allotted maximum mills this year. They are under the cap, and there's no necessarily guarantee that they're going to get a 3% increase on the dollars they levied last year. They could, your board could decide to do that, but there's no guarantee.
I agree with that. And then this is not really for today's discussion, but thinking long term, if this is the way we still operate local government, you really do start questioning, well, what is the idea of then having mill levy breakouts for all these separate mills? Why not just set a cap of how much you can spend and let the local decide where to put it? So, but that's for another long-term discussion.
All right, we have another question, Linda.
Yes, I was just asked whether or not the caps apply to soil conservation districts, and they do. Soil conservation districts are also a not to exceed mill levy authority. They might feel differently, but our interpretation is that the caps apply to soil conservation districts.
Maybe somebody here can just address in general who this applies to.
Every single political subdivision are now capped at 3%, unless they are not capped at 3%. So the answer, but
why didn't you say that first, Aaron? We could be gone a long time ago.
But the legal answer is there's nobody excluded from caps in the bill from political subdivisions. The medical center is excluded from the cap, kind of, sort of. By the way, we've tried to get that repealed for 2 sessions now and can't even get 1 mill off the books. Anyway, I digress. They are in it.
More great attorney advice there, just pointing out.
Yeah, and just so you know, you're going to get a bill in the mail from the 3 up here per hour. Yep. So that's why we're dragging it on as long as we can.
Yep.
All right, any other questions from the crowd? All right, any closing comments from our illustrious panel up here?
I think it's great seeing the participation. I don't know if you had the numbers, but we were at like 700 between in-person and online, right?
Yeah, we hovered right about 400 online today. We hit about 422, and we're at about 335 now. They've been tailing off once you guys got up here.
So
That's because Linda answered all of our questions. She did a great job.
So, I mean, I think it's great that everybody is tuning in and paying attention, and everybody we're going to have to do the best we can with the numbers. I think we're going to probably trip a few times, but I'm happy to see how attentive everybody was and that everybody wants to do it right and wants to know what the correct way to do it is.
Yes, very true. Well, let's give these guys and gals a round of applause. They're going to earn more money up here.
All right, just one final thought, and maybe just turn the mic off. This is obviously maybe a little negative because it really is moving people's cheese. But on the bright side, I do think that there's a collective opportunity that we've been working together closer than ever before. And I think taxpayers are going to start expecting the schools and the cities and the counties and all the other political subdivisions to start talking a little more before tax season. I think this forces that. So that's something to consider. And the last thing, we're only talking 1176, but now all the bond issues have to be done on your primary or your general fund, so your general elections. So again, that's a game changer that all of us will have to work through. But it's definitely a new day for local government.
All right, thanks again. Thank you, guys.